It's nice to see you again. And also, we are thankful for giving us your time today to come on the Magnolia chat to share your experience with us. Just to start, who would you say Annice is to anyone who just met you?
Well, that is an interesting question. I would have to look at different segments, but in a nutshell, um, Annice is from a career perspective, just to be on brand. Annice is a commercial banker. She has been a commercial banker for about 5.5 years in different progressive roles within the business line. Currently, she's in a more focused underwriting role within commercial bank, but her prior experience across the different parts, whether it's client facing role or in a risk adjudicator role, had a bit of experience there. So yeah, I'm not sure. I've been in commercial banking for 5.5 years, and yeah, it's been an exciting time. And hopefully, I'll be able to share like nuggets and how I've navigated through and things that I've learned. I'm still learning, but yeah, hopefully, I'll be a good resource for everybody.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction. We are diving right in. So
Okay.
the first question is, what initially drew you to commercial banking versus retail or investment banking?
Actually, when I it's funny because when I thought about my career when I was younger, I actually wanted to be a lawyer.
Oh.
And I actually wanted to be a lawyer, which is a complete different field than what I am. But the interesting piece is I wanted to be a corporate lawyer.
Mhm.
And I said, okay, I was going to do my undergrad in business administration. I was going to major in banking and finance. So it would give me that foundational piece. And then I would do law. Fast forward, I ran with this idea for years on end. Fast forward to actually specializing or majoring in banking and finance during my undergrad degree, and then I had a bit of a mind shift. I was enjoying what I was doing. I liked it. Why shift into something that I honestly don't even know where the true purpose came? I just, when you grow up in a Ghanaian household, you're thinking, okay, doctor, lawyer, right? and
Yeah.
so I decided to stay within the field, but I wasn't sure where I would land.
Mm.
But I was also open to different opportunities. So I did my master's here in Canada. And then when I was done, I I was looking at different opportunities and I was actually very open. I applied to a number of roles, but the most important thing I thought about is how would that opportunity align with my interests, my strengths, and my personality. So I like to talk. I like engaging with people. So I said, and I thought about commercial banking, and it just allowed me to, you know, leverage that strength or that skill set that I had, whereas I enjoy talking to people while being analytical. So
Mhm.
I decided to explore that, and for me, a career that allowed my personality to shine. I thought that would be a good way to be able to start my career. So I got an opportunity through a rotational program in commercial banking, which was good because when I did my master's degree, I didn't work in industry. So I just jumped from school. I took a gap year doing behavioral finance, but nothing to do with what I do now. And then I came to school. So the rotational program was actually good because it bridged that gap where you've gone to school and you've learned everything in academia versus real world. So it was a year-long program where you're essentially understudying people. So that's how I got into it. And the plan was, okay, I will do it. And if I don't like it, you're young, you can explore other
Mhm.
opportunities. But after the year elapsed, there was a particular unit that I really liked. And then I decided to stick with it. And that's actually been my path for the past 5.5 years. But I'm still open. And I think that's a general theme that I have for myself. Like, would I be in commercial banking forever? I'm not too sure,
Yeah.
but so far it's working, and
Mhm.
I'm staying with what works, but I'm still open to exploring different paths, right? So yeah, that's long story short how I got into commercial banking.
Oh, that's good to hear. I didn't know you wanted to be a lawyer. Um, and so would you say that maybe the environment, like being in Canada, the education like for your master's and then like the opportunities like that also helped push you into this field? Because I'm wondering if like do you think it could have been the same situation like if you did your master's in Ghana and like all
That's a
that?
good question because I think when I came here, I was more open to the different verticals of the bank. I
Mm-hmm.
think when you think of the bank, obviously, there's retail, sometimes there's an IB, investment banking component. But when I moved out here, I think through the structure that they have in schools here and I don't know what it is now, but compared to what I experienced was very practical. We'll have seminars, we'll have people come in to talk about their work experiences, their career path. So it opened my eyes to what possibilities I had.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think yes, and to some extent, I think my being educated here at least, or at least having my
Right.
master's degree completed
Mhm.
here, opened up my mind to what does like a career look like in banking or in finance in general, right? So yeah, you have a good point there.
Yeah, that's
Because when if I would have been in Ghana, it might have been a different
mm-hmm.
path. However, I think, you know, it would have been a different path, but I think I would have probably still found my way here, but just not at the onset, if that
Right.
makes sense. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, yeah, that totally makes sense. So going more into it, how does commercial banking create value for clients and how is success measured beyond closing loans? Or maybe before you like even answer this question, can you
Yeah.
like just throw a bit of light into what commercial
Sure.
banking is for people who don't understand or like are hearing it for the first time?
No, that's definitely a good good segue into commercial banking. So think about it as a team or a department within a bank that provides a full suite of solutions to a mid-market company. When I say a mid-market company, we're saying companies that maybe generate revenue minimum 3 million. I'm using Canadian dollars, but 3
Right.
million Canadian dollars to about say 80 million to 100, right? So they'll be
Mhm,
mid-market. They're bigger than like a small business, but they're not as large as like a multinational or publicly traded company.
mhm,
So when I say full suite of solutions, it could be lending solutions, it could be, accounts, deposits, treasury solutions, cash management. So full suite. So there are different opportunities within commercial banking. You can stay in a traditional mid-market role where you'll be providing day to day, so like accounts,
right,
credit cards, operating lines, or you can be in a more specialized field where you're only providing term debt lending. So, whether it's going to be like working capital, you're buying an asset, so you're financing a merger and acquisition deal. That looks different from bank to bank, but
mhm.
essentially the full suite of solutions that helps a mid-market company thrive, a commercial bank would typically play in that space
Okay.
if it meets that lending or revenue generating threshold that I highlighted. Every bank has it differently, but I would say between 3 million minimum to about 100 million in revenue, it will fall within the mid-market space.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for explaining that to us. And so now to the main question is how does commercial banking create value for clients and how is success measured beyond closing loans?
I think sometimes in commercial banking, people people tend to look at it as very transactional. It can be, but the
Mm-hmm.
key point of it, and I think over the past 5.5 years, I think it's really on the client experience and relationship management. Um, because you can close a deal and the clients will still have a terrible experience and probably will not want to work with you or the bank again,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So I think success to me with commercial banking, it's outside of just closing the loan, is focusing, having a client focused approach in everything that you do, and then prioritizing the client experience in everything that you do, right? Closing the deal is one thing, but how did you close the deal? What are the steps taken to ensure that the client was placed first in every decision that you took, right? So I think that's how you measure success. And it has a ripple down effect if you have a great client experience, right? You would get referrals, you would see it in your NPS scores, which is just kind of like a metric to track how, clients rate you, the banker, or the banking team. So I
Right.
think the relationship, and then you would get more deals coming back if the client relationship is kept paramount. So I think really outside of just ticking a box, oh, okay, we've closed the loan. I think prioritizing the client's needs and making sure that that relationship is maintained is key. And if you think about it, even in our personal lives, like whoever we deal with, whether it's even going to the bank, you probably want to go to a familiar face where you know
Yeah.
that you have a
Yeah.
great relationship with them. Even
Mhm.
with a realtor, you probably don't want to work with a realtor that did not, you know, give you the best experience, right? So
Mhm.
in life, just even in our day to day, we want to deal with people that we feel like we're valued, we're appreciated, our thoughts and our needs are catered to. So similar mantra to dealing with a business client. At the end of the day, they're also people. So you keep that relationship top of mind, and I think you will be successful.
Okay, thank you so much for going into all that. And just a break to acknowledge the people who have joined so far. So we are talking about commercial banking. You've not missed so much. She's shared a lot of insights, but we still have a lot more to learn from her. So the next question is, which entry points are most common? So in brackets, it says credit analyst, rotational programs, commercial accounts manager assistant.
It's very bank specific, but the
Mm-hmm.
most frequent ones I see people come in as analysts, like straight out of school or undergrad. They start in an analyst position. And in the analyst position, you're really just like a quarterback to the account manager or whoever you're working with and doing more of like the lead work. And then they grow into hold progressive roles into, and then I guess you would do like be a relationship manager. And then, you can branch out to different things, whether you go into leadership or not. But the most common route I see is an analyst. However, I've seen people break through commercial banking during from a completely different career path. Like I've seen engineers go do their MBA and then pivot into that. So it really looks different. But I think if you're straight from school being undergraduate, um, the easiest path is like an analyst, and then you can transition that
Yeah,
way.
yeah, that totally makes sense. So have you ever like encountered or like heard of someone who like came from a specialized field like engineering, like you said, breaking into commercial banking? And if you have you seen them like working specifically with like engineering firms or things like that because they have the expertise and like understand like the groundwork of that?
So that's a good question. There's interestingly, I've come across a lot of engineers that have pivoted to banking. Why I don't know, probably just a coincidence, but they do their MBA, and with an MBA, it's a catch-all for a lot of industries, right? And I think they try to explore, at least the few people that I've interacted with, they try
Mhm.
to explore banking, and commercial banking really is, I guess there isn't, I wouldn't say there's a high barrier to entry. As long as there are two things I look at: the soft skill and then the technical skill. The soft skill for me really is paramount. Like you can be the smartest person in the room, but if you don't have a strong interpersonal skill sets, you
Yeah.
will not really thrive in a role like that. So I
Mhm.
find that that's why it's easier to pivot to
Mhm.
the technical stuff. Yes, you might need some foundational skills in modeling, a bit of being able to interpret a financial statement. But to me, in my personal opinion, it's not rocket science and can be taught and can be learned. But what is hard is really the soft skill, right? Because you're dealing daily with clients. A few of them
Mhm.
may be frustrated, not at you, but at the processes or at timelines. And if you're not able to maintain your cool, you're not able to communicate well, then you're going to struggle in such a role. So that's why I see people pivoting. So if they find, so similar to me, somebody has a inclination with, okay, I think I'm good at talking to people and communicate with people. I'm also analytical. Then I can pivot without necessarily, finding that there's like a high barrier to entry. So yeah, I think those are the key things I've realized with people that have pivoted. But it's usually from an MBA. I find that like when they do an MBA, then they have that. I haven't really seen, and there might be cases, I'm not discounting that, but I haven't really seen someone just leave say a traditional engineering role and then
Mhm.
look into like commercial banking. I think going into the interview, everybody will be a bit, like why there might be questions, but there might be people like that. But the ones I've seen, they came from like, they just completed their MBA. So they have seen a few
Right.
cases, or they have done some foundational courses that, at least get them to a level of understanding of what the role is. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's my experience and observation.
Okay, so you just mentioned foundational courses.
Yeah.
So does it mean that to be able to pivot into this role, there are some like specific courses that you should have studied in school to be able to get the opportunity to get in?
Um, I wouldn't say I wouldn't say there are specific courses, but it would be good for you to be able to at least understand and read a financial statement,
Right.
right? So if you can't do that, it doesn't mean that that means like, there's no point of entry for you. Like for me, like I
Mhm.
said, like the technical skills can be learned and
Mhm.
can be taught, and you can figure that out, but you need to be able to understand the financial statement, read through it, understand what's going on. You need to have a little bit of knowledge about ratio analysis, right? Because when you're presented with a debt request, that's predominantly what you're using to assess if a company can, you know take on additional credit or not, right? So there are some courses that you can leverage.
Mhm.
But I mean, if you've gone to school and taken like an MBA, they would have an introductory accounting course. So that
Right.
at least helps you. So I would say it's tricky. You
Mhm.
might be able to break into it if you do. There's so much resource like online, that takes you through like a quick Excel course or
Mhm.
a quick like financial statement read through. So it's not, you don't necessarily have to go to school for it, but if you
Right.
do go to school and you take a few courses, then you're at a, I guess, better spot than someone who hasn't, right? But
Right.
to me, I think the key, and that's just probably a personal thought, I think the key really is the soft skill, right? And all the behavioral stuff, because your day to day is going to be, you're going to be dealing with all sorts of people, whether
Mhm.
it's a client, your banking team, risk, right? And you
Mhm.
need to have great interpersonal skill for that. So yeah, I would
Okay.
I would say, yeah, that's kind of like my thought process for that one.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much for that. So you did say that you don't necessarily have to go to school for that. So then that brings me to certifications. Is that something that can also give you a boost, or is that something that they look for? So like my question would be like, how valuable have you found credentials like the Canadian Securities courses, the CFA, and like all of those things? If you can speak to that.
I think in a very competitive market, a credential will always help you. It sets you apart. Unfortunately, that's, like that, we're always going to fall on that. But to say that the credential necessarily give you an upper hand when, if you're comparing two individuals, not necessarily. I think it's more zeal, dedication, that really sets one commercial banker apart from the other.
Mhm.
But it's a very competitive labor market now. Unfortunately, these credentials, if you have them, you're definitely going to be looked upon favorably. Obviously, you have to interview and prove yourself. So I wouldn't say necessarily it gives you that. There are things in the curriculums that would help in your day to day, but it's not necessarily going to make or break your career, if that makes
Right.
sense. It will
Yeah.
probably get you into the interview door, probably,
Mhm.
and probably maybe get you a job depending on the situation. But in terms of thriving and being successful, that I do not believe so. And those are just my personal thoughts on that. But yeah, it's definitely a plus. And just investing in yourself generally, I think is always a
Mm.
good thing, right? Even
Yeah.
outside of the commercial banking field, I think it's always good to invest in yourself,
Yeah.
right? And I would always encourage anybody if they can, and if there's time and resources, to put themselves through an additional course, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, I would encourage it, but I would not say it's something that would I would not say it's something that would essentially, give you, a stepping stone once you are in the role, right?
Mhm.
That's kind of my opinion.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much for that. That totally makes sense. So for someone who has the resources to pursue like a credential to give them like a boost, which credential would you recommend them investing in?
If they want to be in high finance, and when I say high finance, I'm saying like investment banking, hedge funds, private equity. The CFA is always your best bet, right? It's very reputable. People respect it. It's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of hours, so that is always going to be, I think, a certification that will stick around for a while. But that's not related to commercial banking. It's just investing yourself in finance in itself. If you want to be more in a accounting related role, I think like the CPA always helps, right? But for commercial banking in itself, it's tough. There isn't anything that I would say that's very specific to commercial banking. Like if you have it, that's like, you're going to be a well-known commercial banking. But if you just want to invest in yourself and perhaps take any of these certifications, I think they definitely give you an edge. So yeah, any of them. The Canadian security course, I find that people do it more on when they are more in retail personal banking, but that
Mm-hmm.
knowledge never goes away. So if that's what you want to do at that particular time of your life, why not? But to something very specific in commercial banking, no. I've seen commercial bankers that have, CFAs, CPAs that have taken the CSC courses. It's a wide range, right? So I would say it has to be more it, it has to be more of an individual scrap through of where you see your career, and if you see yourself in a number of things, right? Commercial banking might not be your there might be an exit story for you outside of commercial banking. So I think, yeah, investing in yourself is always key. Any of those courses to me is a value add.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for that. So next thing is, well, coming away from all the courses and all of that, what does a typical day look like for you, or a week? What does a typical week look like for you?
So in my prior role, I was in I'll call it dual mandate client facing and underwriting role. So essentially what that meant is I had a portfolio of clients, I would service their requests, I would bring in new business, and I would be essentially underwriting that myself. A lot of banks are moving away from that model, but I think that model was great for me to learn because you're essentially end to end.
Mm-hmm.
So my day could be I was meeting a client for lunch for just to chat, just to get to know how they're doing. It's maybe year end. We're just, chatting through the year. Or I will be connecting with accountants or lawyers because they play a role within the commercial banking space in a different capacity. So you would have a network of like accountants, lawyers, and they could bring you business, or you guys could, or you could refer them business as well. Or I could be underwriting a deal. So there's a new deal request on my plate, and I'll be focused on doing that. Or I could be dealing with risk on submission I had sent. So my day was a bit all over the place, but it was all under like three themes. So I'm either business developing, that's getting new business. I'm managing my accounts, so just my portfolio, essentially just attending to their servicing needs, or underwriting. So
Right.
I would say it was very all over the place, but it was essentially within those three categories. Now, I'm a more of a segmented underwriting role. It's still client facing, but
Mhm.
not as heavy on the business development side. So I
Right.
would still partner with, a colleague that's heavily doing all the day-to-day client
Mhm.
facing stuff. And then we would work together and go on client meetings, but it's more heavy focus on executing. So if there's a request, I'm more on the execution side. For now, that's kind of working for me. to be able to segment the three themes and focus on one. So that's kind of, so my day would be, I'll have a request on hand. I'll have to do an industry analysis of, the space in which the business operates in. I would have to test capacity. I will put up investment memo up to risk and with my thoughts as to why we should onboard this client or why we should, take on this new debt request. So things like that. So that's essentially my day. That was my day looks like now for most part.
Okay. Yeah, that looks that's good. I know you had mentioned that like relationship building is very key, but even
Yeah.
as you described what your day looks like, it is very evident that like you work a lot with like building relationships,
Yeah.
spending time on that.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it definitely makes sense, like you said, like everybody wants to work with familiar faces.
Yeah.
It also helps with like uncertainties because
Yeah.
sometimes you might be having a bad day and you don't want to go meet someone who's going to make your day even worse.
Yeah.
So that's really good. That's like this job or this career field builds in a lot of relationship building and
Yeah.
focusing on that.
Yeah.
Uh,
That is true. Even outside of just dealing with the clients internally, it's a lot
mhm,
of relationship building, right? You talk to risk a lot, and there's a lot of um, you have to build reputation and credibility and build a rapport really with your risk partners.
mhm.
At the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to give the final yes or no. So you need to be able to have a
Yeah.
good relationship with them, right? Like to me,
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. And I think sometimes there's like this like risk and like the banking partners are butting heads up and there's this tension. Personally, I don't want that. I want to be able to call my risk partner and be like, okay, I have a deal. It's a bit, hairy, in quote unquote. When we say hairy, it's more so like it's a tricky deal. Let's work through it, right? I prefer to have that relationship with my risk partners than
Yeah.
okay, like it's like you enter the call and it's like, oh, it's all tense. And everybody has a different approach. I just personally like to have that relationship. So even with partners as well, right? It could be risk, it could be, leadership. I think relationship management in this role is like very, very, very paramount.
Yeah, that's really good because I mean it's helpful too for like when you're working through a deal because then if you have a good relationship with who you're working with, then you can be assured that they will pay attention to your
Yeah.
things and like work with your timelines and all that.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for like the in-depth breakdown into all that. So we are going to move into like a mini prompt.
Okay.
I'm going to give the scenario and then you can like give us like the info on what that would look like.
Okay.
For example, you have a local plumbing company that is looking for like 750K operating line plus 400K in terms of like for equipment. 400K term for dollars for equipment.
Yeah.
So what 5 to 7 items would you want to see before recommending terms?
So when I started my career, one of the first things I learned is the 5 C's of credits. So essentially character, capital, condition, collateral, and I'm trying to figure out the last one. But essentially, there are 5 C's of credit that we use to analyze deals, and I've kept that too with me anytime a request comes in. So
Mhm.
with this request, this is an HVAC company, right? So first thing I'm going to think of is character. If it's a new client, I would want to see their historical information. So
Right.
at least 3 to 5 years, so I
Mhm.
can assess a trend of you know how they've done over the past 5 years, right? And it's also important the time that we're in because the past 5 years in commercial banking has been marred. We went through COVID. So a lot of
Mhm.
industries were hit through COVID. So we want to see
Yeah.
how, because COVID really is everybody's down case scenario. To this
Right.
day, I'm
Yeah.
like, when I look at COVID, I'm like, okay, if you could survive COVID, you probably could survive a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
Because everything was really shut. So a trend of their historicals to be able to see how they weathered through different storms. So we had COVID, and then we had a period after COVID where interest rates were low, so
Mhm.
everybody was taking on new debt. So if they
Right.
were one of those, and they probably took on a lot more debt that they could they could handle. So
Mm-hmm.
how did, if they were one of those, how did they handle that? And then post that low interest rate environment, we had inflationary pressures. Everything was becoming expensive for everybody, retail, businesses. It was, the margins were being compressed. So how did an operator weather the storm through like high inflationary pressures? There was, you know, issues with and post that there were issues with tariffs now coming into
Mm-hmm.
play. So the
Yeah.
past 5.5 years gives you a good picture of how a company can navigate different economic cycles. So that would be character, my first test to be able to, see, okay, how did top revenue trend over the past
Mm-hmm.
5 years? How did their bottom line trend over the past 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then I'll look at capital.
Mm-hmm.
When you're dealing with a business, it's so important to be able to assess the people behind the business. If everything goes south, do they have
Mm-hmm.
skin in the game? Or is
Right.
it that, okay, they're just going to wash their hands off because they're highly levered and there's
Yeah.
no equity, right? So you want to be able to also, the people that run the business are a big part of your assessment. So capital, is there capital backing this business, right? So, because there are some economic cycles that we go through that is really outside of the control of like a
Yeah.
business operator. Is just probably
Mm-hmm.
industry specific. And you want to be able to know that there's management backing, that they could support it, right? The bank will always be there with you, but would they support it with equity injection? What does that look like, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then next will be collateral. That's your security. Essentially, when we hand out or we provide, loans, whatever that will look like, we need security backing it. Typically, we could have an unsecured loan, but that would come with like higher rates. But for the most part, you still need security,
Yeah.
you know. So you want to see what type of security you have, right? For the
Mm-hmm.
operating line, there'll be, it typically is backed by inventory and receivables. Now, if it's like in a food and beverage space, the inventory really is not, it's like it's perishable, so you really cannot value that, right?
Yeah.
Or receivables being, they've provided services to a customer and they are yet to receive the cash. Are these receivables over 90 days? So, they're waiting over 90 days to collect. That's pretty much closer to, would you want to rely on this? Like what's the collection quality of like an over 90-day receivable? So you want to analyze those things. You also want to analyze what type of assets do they have. Is it heavy on machinery? And that's good, right? But then you'd also have to apply discount factors, because if an equipment is selling for 2 million, in a bankruptcy or scenario, it will not go for 2 million, right? So
Yeah.
things like that, being able to assess the collateral value of the business and conditions. So HVAC company, it's very important to know what space they play in, because the
Mm-hmm.
residential sector, especially the condo market, is not doing well.
Right.
So then vendors that or suppliers that service that particular part of the market will also not be doing well. So you also be able to assess like this HVAC company, is it a mixed range of residential and commercial? Is it just commercial HVAC, right? So that will be able to give you a sense, because then you would ask yourself, do they really need this line if they are not, if they are struggling, right? So those are the conditions that you would look at. And the last C being capacity, and that's probably the most important. You
Mm-hmm.
know, even when we take on personal mortgages, our capacity is being assessed, right? Can
Yeah.
this company debt service this amount that they're asking for, right? They're asking for 400,000 in equipment line. If they are EBITDA negative, they cannot even repay their debt. So the 5 C's of credits are really the hallmark of every credit assessment or credit decision you would have to make. And you might not necessarily outline your investment memo in the 5 C's, but I'll say those 5 buckets you'd have to address before you'll be able to make a decision.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's those were some really good points, and thank you for taking us through some of the things you look out for when you're assessing like a client or a company for a loan or all that. So the next question is, how do you balance relationship building with prudence, risk management, with incentives conflicts?
It's an everyday battle, because especially now that I'm in a segmented role where there's like the salesperson or the client-facing person and you're the underwriter.
Mhm.
Um, but you know what I've learned is a quick no is better than a protracted no,
Mhm.
right? I think sometimes in order to please the client, there are times where you could honestly shut down a request reasonably, without having to go through the hoops and the loops of, okay, maybe we'll do it, maybe we'll not do it, and waste the customer's time.
Yeah.
Even if you think about it personally, I rather take a no, I'm not getting something, than
Yeah.
maybe I'll get it, and then 3 months down the line, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm not getting it, right? So, but it's a constant struggle. Because sometimes, and sometimes when you're doing a deal, you get so focused on it that you probably have blind spots that you miss, and then you go to credit and they flag it. It's like, okay, I don't think we can get there. But I think the good way of navigating through that is socializing a deal ahead of time always helps, right?
Mhm.
Like, especially a tricky one where you're not sure or you've not worked a lot in that space. It's always good to go out to leadership and say, okay, hey, this is the request, this is what I'm thinking, and you get some guidance there, right? And then so that's one, socializing the deal, whether with leadership or risk partners, is always good because I typically used to do that because then when I'm sending the deal, they've seen it before, right? Unless there's some material thing that would completely change the due request. They've seen it before, and I've gotten a bit of a blessing. So
Mhm.
that's one thing. And the second thing, if you absolutely know that this debt request or this request falls outside of our risk parameters today, you shut it down now rather than give false hope. And then also, if you can't be the banker to provide that particular need, I sometimes I find it tough to say no without direction. So say
Mhm.
you can't provide, so say there's a working capital request that you can't provide for a number of reasons, say that they don't have the capacity, but they really need it, and it's going
Mhm.
outside of traditional lending parameters. There are other financial players in the space that you can refer them to,
Mhm.
right? And I think clients value that. Okay, maybe bank A could not help me, but bank A introduced me to somebody else that could help
Like,
me, right? So it's like you don't shut the door without a solution.
yeah.
So I would say, and yeah, those are the three things that I think come to mind when navigating that. Yeah, like a quick no, especially if you know that this is not going to work, a quick no is much appreciated. I
Yeah.
think clients understand, well, most clients understand that they will not get everything they ask, but
Mhm.
they appreciate the communication and the um, um, upfront communication with them that this is probably, it's probably not a no, it's probably a not now.
Mhm.
And then obviously engaging with partners early on. Like if you have a request that's tricky and you think there's a case, like talk to leadership, talk to risk. Those are the people that you need in your corner, right? Yeah. So that's kind of like the top two things that I would
Yeah.
highlight.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you so much for that. And from what you just shared, it pointed at like a few things that like stood out to me is the importance of communication in this
Mm,
field as well, and also the importance of really being a problem solver. Cause like knowing
yeah.
that like even like in instances where you can't help a client, you should be able to help provide some solutions for them to look through so that they don't feel like completely shut down and all that. But with that, have you had a situation where you couldn't help a client and
Yeah.
then like even like explaining everything and like providing solutions and then they were like very bitter and then misbehaved for lack of a better word?
Everybody is different. So you definitely have people in this space. That's why interpersonal skills is so important. Definitely have people in this space that, obviously they believe in their business, but they don't see or they don't wear the risk hat that the bank wears,
Right.
right? Or
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they're like, okay, like maybe they want a commercial mortgage for their new warehouse, right? And the business can only generate X amount of money that could maybe service a $2 million loan. But
Mm-hmm.
they want the building is probably worth $10 million. They want up to
Mm-hmm.
maybe say eight. There's a
Right.
disconnect sometimes between their cash flow
Yeah.
capacity and the security. They're like, oh, you have this security. I'm like, nobody just wants to lend just because we have this security. Because when we go into a realization scenario, we're probably not even going to get an 8 million, right? So people, there's a balance between making them understand cash flow. Like you need to be able to pay the debts, the debt obligations on this loan, and then security. So yeah, you definitely have a few people that don't get it. But I think as long as you've been able to communicate, because every bank is different and every institution is different, but at the end of the day, the lending metrics are the same. So they're probably going to hear the same story
Right.
elsewhere, unless maybe they have a different risk appetite where they don't necessarily focus on cash flow, but they just focus on that. There are players that way where they don't care about the cash flow, they focus on the asset, but then there's a different risk profile and return profile. You're probably going to pay more interest. But if you're looking more of a traditional bank, the lending metrics might probably be the same. So you're probably going to hear the same story with somebody else. So yes, you do have the odd case where there's a bit of a mismatch as to what they believe they could get versus what you're, advising that you could get
Mhm.
to. I think you just have to be satisfied in the fact that you've done everything that you've done.
Yeah.
Um, Sometimes it's also okay to bring leadership in to reiterate that point.
Yeah.
You're going to have players that do what they want to do, but I think you just take satisfaction in the fact that you offered advice, you offered solutions. It may not necessarily go well. It's just life in general, dealing with different personalities, different people. But I think if it's a lending decision, they'll probably get the same answer somewhere else. So
Right.
they might probably come back later and probably share that you are probably right, right? So yeah, you do have those odd scenarios. But if you've done everything, you've ticked all the boxes with regards to helping the clients, I think you, you take satisfaction that you've done your best, and you win some, you lose some.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Annice. I have learned so much today from this chat. Like, prior to this conversation, I didn't really know much about commercial banking. I just knew you worked in it. That was all. But today I have learned so much more. And even for myself, I know that one day, like if I have a business and I have to like come to like a bank to speak with a commercial banker, I know that like what you shared with the five C's, I have to also do my own assessments before I come to you and like be open-minded and know that like I might not be able to see everything from where I stand, and the like and trusting like the commercial banker to help with
Yeah.
this. So I believe that our viewers have also, and the people we have in the call have also learned so much from this. So we are really going towards the end of this chat. So I'm just going to read one myth for you to bust, and then I
Okay.
think we have a couple of questions in the chat, and then we'll go into that.
Okay.
So there's one myth about commercial banking that you bust. Have you heard about like people throwing about like certain myths about commercial banking?
Um, yes. So because it's not necessarily high finance, people think it's boring. And I think it's a personal take sometimes, but to bust this, I would say you work with different operators in different industries. No day is the same. No financial year is the same for your portfolio. It's like a mixed bag of different things. So that makes it fun. So if that's one thing I would like to debunk is, well, because of that nature of like, a diverse portfolio, every day
Mm-hmm.
looks different, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so I would because when you get into high finance, it's all fun and everything. Everybody wants to be in investment banking, everybody wants to be in private equity, which is
Yeah.
great. They're all great careers, but commercial banking is also very fulfilling. It's
Mhm.
very fulfilling. I think one of the great things that I've learned about it is, because you're part of a process that helps build a business from point A to point B. There's a level of pride that you have that you're part of the growth story in a way that's not as front facing to the world,
Mhm.
but the client
Yeah.
appreciates that that was the team that put together this debt solution that got us to be from a $2 million top line generating company to a $30 million one, which is a bit fulfilling, right?
Yeah.
um So yeah, I would probably debunk the boring, but I'm probably also very boring, and maybe that's why I'm saying it's not. But I'll say, but I'll say
I
in
disagree.
in general terms, honestly, just I think it's a fun role. And yeah, you would have a lot of fun if you give it a shot. Obviously, everybody's is different and what they like, but if anybody has heard that it's boring, I would definitely encourage them to talk to people in this space and get their perspective, and before making a decision.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for that. Thanks for busting the myth. So we have a couple of questions in the session, the
Okay.
comment. I think the first one I saw was, can introverts go into commercial banking?
Good one. That's a good one. I think they can, because it's so broad. You don't necessarily have to be client facing in that sense, if that's going to overwhelm you. Like in the role that I am now, it's a bit client facing. Like, yes, I still have to go into the meetings, but I'm not necessarily doing all the day-to-day conversations. I'm just more so there to be able to get the items I need to be able to tell the story in my underwriting role. So you can still do it. Um, an introvert could start out in an analyst position. They don't necessarily, like, they would go on they would join the relationship managers or like the banking team to meetings, but they will not necessarily lead the conversation. So
Right.
an introvert can explore it that way by
Mhm.
starting out. But if for sure you've explored it and it's something that you think, okay, like, absolutely not, sales I cannot do, the underwriting job is there for you to do, right? It's purely analytical, so you could do that. You could also do a risk role, but I
Mhm.
find that with risk, you probably have to have had tons of experience
Right.
doing this job before you become more of an adjudicator. So I don't see people young going into risk,
Right.
but that's something you could do later on in your career. So I would say it's a yes or no. At the end of the day, any decision that you take as an individual has to be informed by genuine interest. If you don't like it, you're
Mhm.
never gonna like you're going to struggle with the role. So
Yeah.
introvert or not, you just have to see what you genuinely like. I think they might probably struggle with, like, okay, going to events and
Mhm.
you know
Yeah.
like, and initially I thought I was a yapper and I like to go on, but when you go into these networking events, sometimes you have to break into like groups, like break
Yeah.
through them and introduce yourself. So if you find that challenging, then maybe it's not for you. But I
Mhm.
always say get out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
I think it's good to have two different, like, you should be able to prove to yourself that you can do it and shut it down
Right.
when work is over. So I would
Mhm.
always encourage an introvert to explore it, but obviously to a level in which you're comfortable. And if not,
Mhm.
there are different parts of the commercial. You could even go into strategy in commercial banking,
Mhm.
right? Like, you're shaping the policies or creating the experience for the banking team to thrive in. That too is a role that you don't necessarily need to be an extrovert for. So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you so much for answering that. You had mentioned underwriting throughout your conversation, and even now, like recommending that as something an introvert can look at, like going into. What is that like? Or like, what do you write? What's that?
So essentially, so like the business case prompts that you gave me, right? All the legwork stuff to go
Mhm.
through the 5 C's of credit you'd be handling.
Okay.
So you would essentially, get your package and you go through everything, and you'll be making a recommendation either to the banking team or the relationship manager saying, based on my analysis, I think it's a yes, no, maybe, or maybe get me XYZ and we can reassess. Then if it's like, typically depending on the bank or the financial institution, they have a process. But if it's ready to go to you have to formally write a business case to submit to credit. So you will be doing that. You'll be underwriting the entire thing. So you similarly have that same process when you're even getting like a personal mortgage. Somebody's out there saying, okay, person A, person B has X capacity. So that whole process is
Mhm.
underwriting. And
Right.
you would have that vetted with like a risk partner. So that is something an introvert could do, right? And still have the perks of probably joining a meeting with a client, but not having to say much. So yeah, so that's
Yeah.
that's a segment that they can explore. But I
Awesome.
would say push yourself if you can.
Yeah. Thanks so much for going into that. So our next question is, does your team usually have a relationship with the collections stroke receivable team, especially when a client is in default?
So there's like technical defaults and actual defaults. So technical default, maybe you're offside, your covenant being that these benchmarks the banks will set like quarterly, semi-annually, annually to meet certain thresholds. So let's say your working capital ratio should be, I don't know, 1.3 times. So if you fall short, you're technically offside the
Mhm.
benchmark, but it doesn't mean you're in a situation where the bank will be necessarily worried. There could be situations driving that. But I think this person's question really is about an actual default where it's like, okay, the business is, really at a point, the verge of like essentially shutting down and we need to
Yeah.
go collect our like relies on our security.
Mhm.
On that side of things, I haven't worked yet on like what a realization scenario is, but you
Right.
typically work with lawyers that will work through that, and I'm sure there
Mhm.
are relationships to be able to handle that. But yeah, that's why the analysis forms a big piece of your due diligence, right? Let's say you have $1 million out and all you have is security over inventory and receivables. That's something that you have to go chase, right? But
Yeah.
it's not something that's part of our day to day. Thankfully,
Right.
there's a workout team that does that. Unfortunately, we
Mhm.
would have to transfer over to the workout team, and that's something
Mhm.
that's also it's still commercial banking, but it's the kind of like you're dealing with like defaulted clients and call it so it'll be like a special loans department. So that's something that an introvert could also do. Um, yeah, so personally I haven't dealt with that, but yes, I'm sure there's a whole team dedicated to be able to realize on your security.
Okay. So the workout team, is that like an in-house credit team?
So some have it differently. You would have an in-house credit team, or at least the ones I've seen, that work with external ones as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, so you have one because so when loans are, or I guess when clients are to a point where it's like we should be really concerned about the operations and where they're going, we typically transfer them to a team that just handles like the portfolio of clients that are going through a
Mhm.
bit of a downturn. And if it's to a point where it's like, okay, we need to exit the relationship, we need to realize on our security, they work with external consultants to be able to do that. So there's a dedicated team for that. It could be in-house, it could be a myriad of in-house and external people working together. My bet is that it's probably a mix because if you have to go work with a collections agency, it's probably not going to be in-house. You want to refer that over. But yeah, to answer the question, it's probably very FI specific.
Thank you so much for that. So we have one more question. It says, what are the biggest performance metrics that matter in a commercial banking role?
um Sales targets, and it's probably when people hear that, they're probably like, oh, that's a lot. How am I supposed to bring X amount of dollars every year? That's always the number one driver, especially if in a client facing role, is how much dollars you contributed during the year, to be honest. And then I'll say, I mean, every year is always different. Like I said, the past 5.5 years, there's been some sort of turmoil that we're dealing with, whether it's COVID, and it's always been challenging going into the new year. But what I've found that helps people thrive, and I think I mentioned that, is if you have a strong relationship with your clients,
Mhm.
you'd be surprised at you don't necessarily sometimes you don't necessarily even have to go out to like
Mhm.
network. You will find that that relationship just brings you new because they will talk
Right.
to a friend who's talked
Mhm.
to another friend, and that alone is like a pipe that never runs dry. Also, if you maintain relationships with like the accountants and the lawyers and they trust that you do good work, they would want their clients to work with you.
Right. Yeah.
So you don't necessarily feel the target because it's so hard when you think of sales, you're thinking you're selling something. But
Mhm.
I try to get people to move away from that notion. It's really relationships, because for me, if I meet somebody, and I don't know about anybody else, if I meet somebody on the street and they're like, oh, buy this, I might not, unless it's some brand that I know for
Right.
sure.
Yeah.
Like, but like if it's something that I haven't experienced, I probably would want to even get to know you, have a sit, chat with you, probably have multiple follow-up conversations to be able to feel like you're trustworthy for me to enter into a business relationship with
Yeah.
you. And that's how I see, that's how commercial banking works. Like I find that clients are typically less transactional, like because everybody has a working relationship with the bank. You can go and knock on the door and say, oh, I'm bank A or bank B, these are my products. They're probably the same products in another bank. Why
Yeah.
would they move over to you, right? So
Yeah.
winning that relationship takes time. You probably have to go to that business XYZ times and probably move away from the notion of, okay, I need to win this and just build a relationship, right?
Mhm.
Or just be, I find going the extra mile and providing value add, like, whether it's like advice,
Mhm.
credit, like just hearing them out and just know, oh, I have this problem. And you're like, oh, I can introduce you to XYZ. Then they build trust with you. When you build trust with
Yeah.
somebody, it's easy for them to then pivot, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, I would say when it comes to sales, and I actually went off a tangent to be able to encourage people that it can be scary thinking about it, but if you're really good at relationship management, it will take time, but at some point it will just be like the gifts that keeps on giving, right? So sales targets, um, um, sometimes they get clients feedback on how
Mhm.
you're servicing them and goes back again to relationship management. If you don't check in as much, if they send you a request and you sit on it for like days on end without a communication, they're
Yeah.
probably not going to value your relationship, and they're probably not going to give you a good rating. So that is also going to affect your performance. So yeah, sales targets is usually like client surveys that go out, and then just as an individual, being a keener, curious, dedicated, I think that to me is so applicable to every type of role outside of commercial banking. I think, once you're keen, you're dedicated, you're curious, you're hardworking, it would translate to different metrics that would help you thrive. But I'll say the key ones are being, especially in a client facing role, being able to bring in new business, and
Mhm.
then maintaining good relationships with your clients that would translate into high like client survey scores.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes total sense. Thanks so much for going into that. So I was going to ask, so in this role, do you get like sales targets, or like are you given like quotas or something like that that you have to work with? And
So that's actually a good question. When I was going into a role like that, like this, I'm like, okay, I'm going to move away from the sales targets, which is good because then the pressure is off me.
yeah.
But I think in this particular role, there's a little bit of that, but it's a function of the people that you work with. But you're not as it's not heavily weighted, so you will get a boost if you do work on a lot of things, right?
Mhm.
So it's always good to also, like, if you're not busy, it's probably good to put up your hand and say, okay, I have capacity to work on things, and then that kind of helps you also grow that piece. But you're not necessarily, the rating is not heavily weighted on that.
Mhm.
It's probably more on the quality of what you submit, or sometimes there are reports about. So if we have a portfolio of clients, there are interim reviews that we do, and then reviews, essentially we get the statements and we test how they're doing. And there's always like a timeline in which you should do it by. So if you
Mhm.
have a large portion of your portfolio that's essentially outside of that timeline, then you get
Yeah.
dinged for that. So
Right.
just staying on top of things, being very detailed and efficient, and how you turn around things, because you also don't want to be too fast that your work quality is very low. It's always a balance. And
Right.
then also naturally, sometimes you don't get statements early. So
Mhm.
unfortunately, it depends on your portfolio composition. But those are things that you're able to communicate during like a performance review. Like if you have a lot of December year ends, unfortunately, in whenever
Yeah.
the statements are due, you're always going to have a lot,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
I mean that I don't think anybody's going to, like, ding you for, because it's just unfortunately how your portfolio is. But yeah, to answer your question, it's really dependent. I've seen other teams where it's a team target.
Mhm.
So um even though I'm not necessarily responsible for bringing in new business, if somebody does, we all share in in in
Right.
in, in that, right? So it's really it really is dependent, but it takes off that pressure that you have to be responsible for putting in
Right.
that. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Annice,
No worries.
for really enlightening us about commercial banking. And I know that like all of us are going to leave this session with a lot of things that we've learned from you. So we really appreciate your time today, sharing all of this with us. I think we have actually come to the end of the session. So thank you so much to everyone as well who was able to make it into this session. And we apologize for the issue with the live, but we are so glad to have had you here. We are going to be posting this also on Instagram, so you can always go back to it if you want to like refresh yourself on what you learned from this session. So before we go, I would like you to give a book recommendation, like a book that has been really helpful to you. It doesn't have to be career related, but a book that was a good read that you'd like to recommend to everyone.
I'll probably switch this up a bit because I think I do a podcast.
Mhm.
Um, if so, I'm going to look at the two fronts. I think there's one Morning Brew Daily. What it does is essentially like a 20-minute sum up of like everything that's happening in and it's out finance, economy, and it's always good to know, right? It makes you well
Mhm.
rounded, and it also adds to when you're having conversations you're actually more engaging when you know. So I would say that is, it's 20 minutes. The hosts are very hilarious, so they make it very relatable. It doesn't feel like you're listening to CNN or like or something that is very like drags on. So I'll shout out that podcast. And then also when pivoting to more career related, I would say there's a YouTube channel, it's called Finance Kid. It's actually a Canadian banker that's been in commercial banking. I think has actually branched out to do his own. I think he has his own M&A shop now. Finance Kid, very good, has a lot of details as to you
Yeah.
know how to get in, how to navigate, a little tips, tricks on how to be successful. Yeah, so I would say really because I'm really more into podcasts, I would say that's those are the two things, or YouTube channel that you can leverage.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'll reach out to you for those and then we'll attach that in the post so that people can easily find it and then do more research if they are interested in the field. So thanks again for today and we really appreciate having your time, having you here, spending your time with us. And I really did learn so much. And I am sure that like everyone in this call also learned so much. So we'll call it a day and just go enjoy your day. And happy Valentine's to everyone.
Happy Valentine's Day to everyone. Thank you so much to the team for having me. Yeah, looking forward to catching the next person next month.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so
All
much.
right. Thanks
Bye.
everyone. Bye.